And should we go ahead and take attendance for this meeting? Yeah, okay. So let's go around and when you say your name, if you could just say where you're from, like what entity you're representing. Start.
Oh, hi. Sarah Arndt. I'm a representative from the city of Vancouver. And Dodge, City of Buffalo.
Deborah Strebnick, City of Kenmore.
Bing Tang, Darlington Center.
Ryan Lebowski, the King County Council, District 1.
Sarah Perry, King County Council, District 3.
I'm Nathan Phillips, the CEO of the North Shore Senior Center. I'm not on the board.
Yeah.
Christine Scott, an NPRSA Program Manager.
I'm Barbara Glass. I'm the NPRSA Public Records Officer, also the clerk. And I'm going to ask everyone, whenever we're trying to record, but we don't really have a great setup. We're just using my computer microphone. So whenever we're speaking later, especially in the next meeting, please say who you are when you're speaking so that we can make sure we capture that for the minutes.
And I'm Paul Curtis with ARC Archetypes.
Right, and I think, for the special meeting, we really just have the one agenda item, so do you want to
Okay.
go ahead and take?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, I think we need to do public comment
Oh,
first.
Yes. Yes, we do.
So let's go ahead and do that. I think my understanding is that our ground rules is 3 minutes per
Correct.
Yes.
public comment. And just as a grounding orientation to this special meeting, this is about the separate initiative, separate from the senior center, for a community center, and trying to understand what might be the attributes we would look at in a site for that new facility. Is that a fair kind of summarization? Okay. So public comment and up to 3 minutes. We have a timekeeper?
Yep.
Thank you. All right. And do we have sign in for public comment, or how do we don't have a podium? Well, anyway.
Yeah, we'll
I
take
guess just
we'll
go
take
ahead.
the name.
But
Yeah.
when you make public, the staff can distribute that if you want to go ahead and make your comment. Other people, so introduce yourself and the city of residence. It's somewhere here. Yeah, it's a.
My name is Mike Millman. I'm Mayor of Woodville. I'm here to talk about our enthusiasm about a community rec center in Woodville. Recently, City Council passed a resolution that our city manager would pursue property meeting this criteria. And the handout that you're getting right now kind of goes through some of the criteria that we understand it. We've identified 6.4 acres in Woodville. And it's basically in that area where the star is. It's right off 522. And if you know Woodville at all, it's just east of Homer Pet. So it's right off 522. It's, and you can tell it's that dot up there to the upper right is just the geocentric center of the NPRSA area. So we're really close to the center of that area. With buffers, the site that we have identified and that we're pursuing, and we've also, hopefully we don't have to pursue this, but we've laid the groundwork to do eminent domain if necessary. We think we have willing partners, but the way the process works, you have to do it up front and you can't do it later. So we will have property forward that meets this criteria. The GD zone is general business zone where this property is sited. It allows this type of use. It's also part of the future creative district that Councilmember Sarah Perry has helped us with. I think it's pertinent because there will be some synergy with the creative district being so close to a rec center. And I would want to point out that 2011, I think it was, at the tail end of the Great Recession, the city of Woodinville did away with its parks and rec department. So right now we don't have a park and rec department. So this is a definite need in the area. Again, it's centrally located in NPRSA service area. It's 0.3 miles from the 522 202 interchange. So it's really accessible to the area. It's adjacent to the East Rail corridor, so if you're familiar with Woodville, just north of the post office and up towards Costco, that's our East Rail. We got permission to pull the tracks. Kind of late to the game, but we're working really hard to start our participation in the East Rail corridor. So that, and I highlight that because we are going to, in the linear park that we're proposing, that would be just south of this proposed community rec center. We're proposing lots of different recreational opportunities, outdoor opportunities there. It's also very close to a bus stop and also a parking lot. So it's very centrally located. This GB area is where we've identified where we're going to site a lot of our affordable housing too. So I think that's pertinent to what we're talking about too. So happy to answer any
I
questions.
think we're at time. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah,
Any questions?
it's public comment, so we'll, Right. Next. Other folks that would like to speak to this, meeting? Right. All right,
Can I ask you any other questions?
yeah,
I know it's public comment, but it's there.
yeah.
Woodville's resolution, or maybe talk about, but with the facility having versus not having a swimming pool component or product component, is that will be part of the discussions and interest?
We've identified property that meets both the rec center and the Olympic site pool. And in Woodinville, I think you guys did a study that shows that in Woodinville specific, there is a big interest in that. I've also reached out, I ran on my time, but I also reached out to North Shore School District. They have a need for swim team, water polo. I reached out to Woodinville High School. They have a need for their underwater robotics. We have a couple swim coaches that reached out to me that they want to do that. So there would be built-in anchor tenants to this facility.
You know, Buffalo?
Did they already have?
I haven't reached out to them, but that's a great idea.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, let's head into our presentation if there's no other public comments.
Just a moment.
Oh, okay,
I'm
sorry.
getting something here. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, so as we talked about last time, we were going to be bringing some ideas about how we would rank sites relative to one another. And so we've pulled together criteria that we have seen on other projects and others that we just felt were pertinent here. But we also felt like this was an opportunity for everyone to weigh in. This is not necessarily just like we're coming with the recipe that's going to spit out the exact right result. It's part of a conversation. So this is a starting point. We look forward to hearing everyone's input on, whether it checks all the boxes or there's certain criteria that would really be important to add to this list. So we have kind of broken these criteria down into three big categories. One, I will just skip through quickly because it's really just the general information about the site, the zoning, the site name, the site address, things like that. This would make sense if you're seeing it more in the matrix that lays out the point scoring. And then getting into the more influential criteria, there is sort of a go, no go threshold of criteria, which is called the essential criteria. The two items that we have identified there are, is it publicly owned? You don't need to rehash that, but it's difficult to make a privately owned property work with the process that we're currently undertaking. And then secondly, the size of the property. And at our last board meeting, we really identified 4 acres as the ideal size for a property or for a project like this. By eliminating things and making cuts that come down from what would be the ideal, a 3-acre property could also work, a 2-acre property could also work. If you get all the way down to the 2-acre property, you are actually cutting program elements that we all decided were valuable to have in this project. If you get down to just a 3-acre property, I think that all the program elements would fit, but likely you're losing some of the outdoor amenities that might complement those. But it's certainly less of a step down than the 2-acre property or 2-acre property would be. So this is one where I would like to get some input at the end here. The way that we've structured this is that we've called the 2-acre minimum as the go, no go. It's 2 acres and we can make it work beyond that. Or this is open for discussion. We could call it 4 acres is the minimum that we would need because that's the ideal program. So there are concessions there. We're saying 2 acres would be the absolute cutoff, but we could bump that up to 4. Right now, the matrix is set up with 2 acres.
And does that include the full option? The 4 acres?
The 4 acres does. The 2 acres, where I say that there'd have to be program concessions, it's very likely some of the aquatic elements would be lost by going down to a 2-acre site. Yeah. Another way to handle this, or sort of a middle ground way to handle this, would be you call the 2-acre the no-go. You know, if it's not 2 acres, we cannot make it work. And then you assign points if it gets over 4 acres, and that works out with the overall scoring. Okay, then we get into more of the non-essential criteria. And we broke these into 3 categories: constructability issues, accessibility issues, and relevant adjacency issues. The constructability issues are: 1, is it an allowable use in that particular zone? And I'll kind of go through and talk on the next slide or the next sheet about how we might handle some of the scoring of how those points might be allocated on each of these items. But right now, just sort of running through them. Also on constructability, utility availability. Are all the utilities you would expect to be there available? Are some of them available? Again, that can help give you a nuanced breakdown of the scoring. Environmental concerns, that could be everything from wetlands to bad soils. You know, we've looked at a site that was on a big trash dump, had all kinds of bad things going on underneath the ground. Not for this project, just to be clear. And then topography. I think a certain amount of topography is actually quite nice. You can make buildings work with the topography. You can use elements of the topography to the advantage of the design, and allowing maybe some of the more flatter and usable areas of the site to be used for other elements. But at a certain point, topography can become very challenging and costly to work with. Accessibility. I think another question for the group is, you know, we tried to be as nuanced as possible. Accessibility from walking, accessibility from biking, accessibility for driving, accessibility for public transportation. That sort of assigns a lot of points to accessibility. That all could be kind of a conglomeration of all of those things, accessibility for each of those. And then relevant adjacencies, equitable distribution of services within NPRSA. Are we redoubling down on putting a service where there's already good service, or even maybe similar type service? So that would be something that we would try to avoid. So that would get a lower score. Relevant adjacencies, proximity to target users. Ballard King, who some of you may remember, was at an earlier board meeting. They did the market analysis for the project. They are able to essentially generate a heat map that shows the primary service area and the secondary service area for any site. The primary service area is somewhere where you would be expected, given the distance, to be able to visit the facility weekly. And then the secondary service area is something that a little farther, maybe you would come monthly. And they kind of have the data that generates those sort of circles, but it's based on the arterials, so it's not exactly a circle. And then they can say how many users would be within that area, and we can assign scoring based on how how many folks would be served by the facility. Proximity to open space. That is something where if we're right adjacent to, let's say, a park or athletic fields that are already existing, that can also make a smaller site work better. We can all of a sudden use a 3-acre site because some of those things that we had wanted to account for are already covered by another, not facility, but another location. And lastly, the relevant adjacencies of proximity to parallel programs. This is a little bit like the first item, distribution of services with NPRSA, but it's sort of looking at, rather than being concerned with duplicating services that are already offered, it's sort of, are we dovetailing and building off of other services that are already offered, and that they support one another. So that's the list that we came up with. I don't know if we want to run into kind of how we set up just an example site here. This is not a real site, but it just sort of shows how this matrix is going to work. At the top line, if anything in the right-hand set of 4 boxes comes up as no, that's a go, no go for the whole site. And so where it's the B is made red, that is means that site would be essentially disqualified. And then getting into how each of these would be scored, I sort of touched on these as we went. I'm going to switch back because I can't read that small.
Sorry,
It's okay.
we had to pivot.
So for allowable use, you really have 3 categories there. It's an allowable use right off the bat. It's a use that is can be petitioned and allowed to exist, but takes a little bit of regulatory hoops. And then it's a non-allowed use, and you would have to get a variance or something for that. And so, just as an example, I would say we're working on a 5-point scoring system. So you'd get 5 points if it's an allowed use, 3 points if it's a conditional use, and 1 point if it's a non-allowed use, and you have to go through regulatory hoops. So that one I would say is sort of a quantitative example. We sort of have hard data that can tell us how those points should be distributed. Other ones, we would want to sort of have a working session and understand from folks who are very familiar with these sites, what is it like to drive over to that area of town at 5 o'clock on a Thursday? And, is it hard? Is it easy? So some of that, driving, for instance, we can identify, okay, there's arterials that connect this area to the rest of the NPRSA district, but a lot of that is sort of comes out of conversation that we would want to have with the group. I can go through the whole
Yeah.
list, but I think you get the
Yeah,
idea.
we need, yeah.
So questions from the group? Questions from the group? Sarah, thank you.
Were there, I apologize for not being here for a little bit. And I missed the establishment of the criteria. So were there things that were thought of as criteria in that discussion that didn't make it onto your list?
This is that conversation.
Yeah.
Yep.
There are items
Yeah.
that we've done this a lot, and we've collected these kind of things, and we have sort of a master list of, all the different site criteria that might come up. But this is our initial pass at what felt like the right fit for this
So
particular
there hasn't been
project.
other discussions here
No.
collectively about what that might look like that didn't make it to whatever your initial blush is.
No, that's correct.
Okay.
Other questions? Comments? Questions?
Since you opened up for comments, well, at first, just let me say, I'm very excited to see this progress. I want to express my gratitude to the staff who's advancing this. We've secured the county a total of, I think, $1,075,000 over 2 grants. And we've advanced some of the money to start this work. And it's exciting to kind of see it come to reality. And I want to express appreciation to the city of Bloomingdale for engaging proactively and saying, hey, we've got a site and some ideas. Having represented Woodinville before they're very capable, the council member Perry took over. I did it for about 8 years. I know this location well. I always say 522 is the spine of my district or the Burkhelm Trail. But 522, and then my instant reaction to that site, I don't, not the kind of site, but that looks pretty compelling to me. And so I think it should be considered. On the question, if I can give some feedback of the 2, 3,
Please.
4 acres, I would encourage us to remain flexible and not cancel any sites.
Yeah.
And unless it would create some tremendous burden, but I don't sense that it will. I mean, we're in a heavily urbanized area, the ponds 2 acres.
Yeah.
It's gonna be hard.
Yeah,
3 and 4 is like rare, so I would suggest, that we not have a hard, exclusionary maybe. And we're doing things that may turn out that we can't subscribe, which is that's my initial reaction to that. We allow ourselves some flexibility.
I appreciate that feedback. I think 2 acres is sort of the bare minimum starting point, so that can be our threshold, and then we can figure out how to either add bonus points, so to speak, for a larger site.
And then I'll just emphasize it again. I think our outreach that you conducted professionally shows that we've done this study with the funding from our Penny for Girls program and the counterparts level back. There's just a high demand up here among our constituents for aquatics, and the school district definitely needs it. And I think we have an opportunity here to bring a resource like this park coming forward, regional aquatic facility. We should do like this. Results of those 2 studies basically for listening work. That's it. We need one over here, and then Shoreline Lake Forest Park kind of needs one over there. Really be hard to serve that stretch of the county. So I hope that we can keep pools in the conversation. I am optimistic that our Penny for Pools just generates about $55 million a year. That study will be included in the renewal next year. And perhaps even with some advocacy, maybe we can get against that. I just think there may be some additional dollars. Not solely relying on a local levy to fund our. And I feel like the timeframe of this could match up pretty well with that. So they're just some thoughts from the one county council membership.
Very good.
And thank you for this perfectionism. I have no reason to suggest anything other than the fantastic criteria or seem different.
Okay.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Sarah?
I would just like to kind of echo, I don't see any additional criteria that I think are really necessary to add to this. And I love the accessibility because, as you mentioned, 5 o'clock on a Thursday can be a challenge in some places. So yeah. Anytime on a Thursday can be a challenge some places. So just looking at that from a nuanced lens between the walking, biking, the driving and the transport, I think is going to be key. And looking at it a little bit into the future as well, because we know that bus routes are changing, light rail, we've got some big system changes that may contribute very different traffic patterns by the time that's a facility like this comes online. So just looking into the future a little bit on some of that accessibility.
I just want to say the criteria list feels really thorough, especially what we talked about. I appreciate that we want to take advantage of the trails that stretch across and the NPRSA boundaries. We want it to be drivable. I like, I'm not committing to a windmill site, but I like that it's near a lot of transit and trails, and that to be really a multi-generational facility, we need this. And also just talking about like getting a 2 acre, 4 acre site within NPRSA, like we might find a bit of a site that needs new activity that maybe has had an interesting history. So I appreciate thinking through any environmental concerns and stuff too, because we don't want too much environmental history either. So thank you.
Thank you.
It's around me, and we'll go back around to other comments. This is great. It's, again, I echo the comment about professionalism. It's super. I do have just a couple little comments. You kind of have cost buried in some of the constructability. I've always seen kind of cost as its own criteria. So, I guess I would suggest that might be something to look at. And then the only other comment is on the scaling. Or you use the example of, 135 for the allowable use, and yet there's a 4 there. And so in general, I think if we can't define a number, then we shouldn't, we should just use 1, 2, 3. And I think probably most of these you could get away with 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
But I think maybe is that coming back to us in September, right? That kind of
Correct. Yeah.
the sites and kind of
Yeah.
preliminary scoring.
The
Yeah.
preliminary scoring and the data that supports it, and then, yes.
There.
I'm excited about this and I love that, and I'm not committed to political, but I love this. I love that it's 4 acres. I love that it's on by the trail. I love that it's meeting so many of the criteria that are, recommended. I do like the idea of cost being separated. Absolutely, in my mind, is one of the things to look at separately so that we can define, because different sites are going to require different behaviors that will be more or less expensive, and we should be able to look at that as one of the things. So I would support that. But I love that, and I love the idea that we are really looking at the full scope of NPRSA's boundaries. Right now, it's very, very centric here. And so I like the idea that we're bringing everybody along into that space. And we have the single highest percentage of senior residents is in District 1. And single highest percentage of youth is in District 3. And I love the marriage of those two. And so it's kind of nice to have the both and the multi-generational opportunity that might come from both of those things.
Well, I'm hearing a potential modification to add the cost to the criteria, and also I think I'm hearing the direction of allowing the 2 acre and then scaling.
Yeah.
But I kind of want to see a thumbs on those, and then we can take a vote on the whole thing.
Yep.
So let's do the each one. So let's do the 2 acre and then scaling for more than that. You can see a show of thumbs. Okay.
Since we
And
don't have
then
video,
the-
everyone
the
approve that.
Cost criteria as its own criteria.
And everyone approved.
So our other comments, and then I think we might be ready to move, comments or questions.
I guess I just wanted to say that next steps before we vote are to that we will, if there are any sites that have not been submitted to NPRSA staff yet for us to add to the site selection process, could you all send those over to us and then we can add them to the list?
Which city?
So right now, so all 3 cities have kind of given preliminary, but I want to reach out back to the city.
So as the volume down, that would be super helpful, because we don't have mics, so it's hard to hear each other.
It's hard to hear you. It's harder to hear you.
Yeah.
I want to go back to each one of the city staff and just before we add this to a list that's going to be in a public meeting, just to verify that these sites are a go for the process. So, and we will be presenting that list, preliminary list at the September's meeting.
On sites, could we also please reach out to the North Shore School District? And could we reach out to some of the youth sports leagues? There's, something baseball, softball.
For sure.
Actually, we are-
Right.
So actually we have, our first committee, our external advisory committee meeting this Friday. And I believe YMCA, Boys and Girls Club are involved.
School district will be
School
there.
district is there, yep. So we can,
First sites I did.
yeah,
Yeah.
correct. So we'll get that. Mhm.
Awesome. All right, I think
I'm sorry. Speaking of NPRSA, have we also reached out to the counties aside municipalities about any property? I know that pushes us to the edge.
Yeah, we, Becky thought that it would probably be best if we just sticked with city-owned properties.
I trust Beck.
Do, I mean, okay.
You know, sometimes we buy it for the school.
And sometimes they're within cities.
That's
You
right.
know, I mean, we have county property within the city, so yeah.
State property. with
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I think any publicly owned.
I think we can
It'd be
have
on
our
the table.
GIS folks to do a search on publicly owned property in this.
Yeah, that's pretty easy.
County staff on there.
Yeah.
So.
All right, we will
Christina,
make that happen.
Okay,
Yep.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Do you have any tribal property up here?
Not yet.
All right, Amy.
I had one quick question. I'm sorry if this is backtracking a little bit, but back to Rob's point about that 2-acre thing, and maybe this is best directed toward you. Is that a hard cutoff? I think there were some properties that were really close, like on the edge of 1.9 or something like that.
If it's that close, it's probably something we could look at.
Okay.
But it sort of gets more costly and less efficient to run the more you have to sort of squeeze things and, you know, a 2-story or
Yes.
maybe a 3-story, depending on how small the site is, building is just higher cost of construction, and you end up having to staff it with more people to get the oversight that you would need.
Of course, I just want to make sure that we were being open and flexible.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think there's certainly a preference for keeping that all in one site, but I know that we had discussed at the last meeting being more flexible, either floor plans and staffing, or maybe separating between 2 sites to come up with space. Again, I know we're very urban areas,
Yeah,
just keeping it involved.
I personally, if there's a couple sites that are in the 1.9 range, we could bump that threshold down to 1.9.
Yeah.
It could be an assembly. so that we want that.
Sure.
Yes, thank you. So if you are entertaining sites that are 1.9 or whatever that those different options are, and you're identifying cost as separate, you just mentioned cost for oversight and staffing, and that wasn't something that I was thinking of. So there's a cost for construction, but then additional anticipated cost for staffing that would be helpful
Yeah.
to have as yet a separate line to look at in making a decision about going in one direction or another.
Yeah, and that, just so everybody's seeing it, the operational performance, when it's noted as operational performance, that's kind of what that's referring to when it's notated after the items. And some of those, both the cost situations with the hard costs and the operational cost, they will have sort of a duplicative accounting, because really, like, for example, the hard costs, that's building size is much, much more of a driver than likely anything that you would run into in the ground or with the site. So like the size of the building is going to be a cost driver much more than site criteria. And then for the site criteria, we're sort of, if we say, oh, it has a lot of wetlands, so that gives it a bad score. Well, that also means that it's more costly to build on. So then that also gives it another bad score. So that it's kind of doubling up on the counting, but I think that's the kind of detail we can get into in the September meeting.
Well, I'm gonna move us along. There are a lot of people here.
Yes, please.
Yes.
So I really appreciate, I think everybody really appreciates, what you pulled together. Super. So I would entertain, Chair would entertain a motion, as noted in this. Back into the last slide, or third, I'm so sorry.
I think the verbiage should be moved to approve the site selection criteria proposed by ARC Architects as amended by the board.
Second. Great, any further discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Right. Leave the motion passes.
Thank you all.
All right. So before we start the next meeting, I just want to give a little summary, and maybe we both do. So this was, the aforementioned discussion was a discussion of potential community center that will be funded by a separate levy.
Right.
Or ballot measure, we should say, probably be bond.
Mhm.
So I don't know if that addresses some, and on a different timeline than the upcoming levy for the senior center. So
Yeah.
you want to comment as well?
Yes,
And
if I-
start the pilot.
Yes. All right, so I actually wrote a prepared statement, so I'd like to begin by reading the statement on behalf of the North Shore Senior Center Board of Directors. To our members, constituents, donors, and community supporters, thank you all for coming to demonstrate your concerns for the North Shore Senior Center. We have heard that some of you here today may have been slightly misled by a rumor that the NSC Board of Directors is considering a change of purpose from a senior center to a youth or community center. As you heard some of the conversation here, I want to make it very clear to everyone that this concept is not, I'm gonna say, not in discussion or under consideration by the NSC Board. I also want to reaffirm our commitment to the seniors in the North Shore service area we serve. Tonight's joint meeting with the North Shore Parks and Recreation Service area, for our landlords for our building and the ones that we're in here, is to discuss options for a levy renewal to fund additional capital repairs for our aging buildings and potentially some amount of maintenance. So as Deborah mentioned, or Chairman Strickland mentioned, bonds to finance construction of a youth community center or other type of community center would be a separate ballot measure. For additional information, you can check NPRSA's website for details on the survey they conducted this month. So you've heard it, I will be there. All right.
Thank you. And it's 5:08. I think we'll open the
Give me 1 second to switch the recordings around.
We just, yeah,
Yep.
1 second.